The world burned. Flames clawed at the shattered remains of Earth's greatest cities, their once proud skylines now skeletal ruins beneath the Ulthar's oppressive warships. From orbit, the planet flickered like a dying ember, its last breaths choking on smoke and plasma fire. The Ulthar fleets hung in the void, an unbroken armada of biometal leviathans. Each ship was a masterpiece of war, fused with living technology, their presence a declaration of dominance. This was not a battle anymore. It was a purge. Deep within the Ulthar flagship, High Commander sci-fi observed the destruction with cold satisfaction. His species had ruled for millennia, conquering civilizations with unerring precision. Humanity had been more stubborn than most, but all species broke eventually. A message blinked to life on his console. Live footage from occupied colonies. Human generals, hollow-eyed and defeated, were forced to their knees as execution orders were carried out. Entire cities had surrendered. Even now, what remained of their fleet scattered like insects, their transmissions fragmented and desperate. He allowed himself a rare moment of anticipation. The war was in its final moments. Soon, humanity would be nothing more than a footnote in history. Beyond the Ulthar blockade, in the shadow of a dead moon, a human vessel drifted silently. Its commander, Elias Cade, watched the same footage in grim silence. His face betrayed nothing. The Ulthar saw only panic, despair, and retreat. That was the point. Across the void, hidden signals pulsed beneath layers of encrypted noise. Every explosion, every frantic retreat, every loss. It was all part of a calculation, a script performed to perfection. Cade turned to his crew. Eyes met his, waiting for orders. Let them believe it. In a buried installation far from the battle, Dr. Lillian Voss monitored an entirely different war. The data stream painted a picture the Ulthar couldn't see. Deception protocols in motion, artificial intelligence patterns weaving a false narrative, enemy fleet formations shifting exactly as planned. It had taken years to infiltrate their systems, to feed them the illusion they were winning. Their own arrogance had done the rest. A new transmission flickered onto her screen. The final Ulthar assault orders. The last stage was beginning. She exhaled. It was time. The void between the stars was crowded with death. The Ulthar fleet, an endless formation of chitinous biomechanical dreadnoughts, loomed over the last human stronghold. The sheer size of their armada eclipsed the system's sun, casting a shadow over the broken remnants of Earth's once thriving colonies. Within the command sphere of the Dominion flagship, High Commander sci-fi observed the battlefield with a detached certainty. The war had dragged longer than expected, but it made no difference. The outcome was already written. The human fleet, scattered and pathetic, clung to survival like a wounded animal, delaying the inevitable. The combat Terrasconi swarmed. "Initiate the final purge," sci-fi commanded, his voice a measured monotone. "Exterminate the stragglers. No surrender, no prisoners." A silent pulse rippled across the fleet. Massive siege cannons began to charge. Flashes of light cut across the void as Captain Elias Cade's fleet surged forward. Human vessels, smaller and outgunned, weaved between the monstrous Ulthar warships, darting like predatory fish in the shadow of leviathans. They fired in calculated bursts, targeting weak points, but the Ulthar had long since adapted. Their shields deflected human weapons with ease, their counterfire tearing into human ranks. Inside the redoubt, Cade watched from the bridge as his fleet pushed deeper into the fray. The tactical redoubt painted a brutal picture. Casualties climbing, formations collapsing, desperation mounting. Perfect. Across the system, his forces were executing a preordained chaos. No clean battle lines, no strategic cohesion, just an erratic, frenzied attack that looked like a final act of madness. Exactly what the Ulthar expected. On his personal display, a separate war unfolded, a different kind of battle. Phase 1 in motion, Cade muttered. He tapped his comm, linking to the woman operating in the shadows. Beneath the frozen crust of a forgotten moon, Dr. Lillian Voss sat at the heart of Project Nemesis. Her fingers danced across glowing interfaces, manipulating a battlefield unseen by organic eyes. Streams of data, pulses of light, and shifting algorithms painted a reality the Ultar couldn't perceive. To them, war was overwhelming force, domination through superior firepower. But this wasn't their war anymore. It never had been. Their fleet communications had been compromised long ago, their encryption cracked and subtly rewritten. Their command hierarchy was intact, but every directive passed through filters, distortions, and reconfigurations before reaching its destination. Voss exhaled as another node came online, spreading like a virus across their network. Cade's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Red," she smirked, "already in progress." Human cruisers buckled and detonated, leaving fiery debris to spiral into the abyss. Emergency distress calls flooded open channels, riddled with static and fear. "Command, we're losing hull integrity. We need immediate..." The signal cut out. Across the Ulthar fleet, analysts observed the battle with calculated detachment. The humans were fracturing, breaking formation, making erratic, suicidal maneuvers. "Just as expected," one Ultar tactician murmured. Zythor watched with impassive eyes, allowing a moment of quiet certainty. They had seen this before, desperate species clinging to existence, throwing themselves at the Dominion's war machine in one final, futile act of defiance. The humans were finished. He turned away, already considering the logistics of post-war occupation. Cade stood at the helm of his warship, watching the Ultar sink deeper into the illusion. For years, he and Voss had been playing a longer game, shaping Ulthar intelligence reports, controlling what they believed, what they feared, what they assumed to be true. The Dominion believed they were fighting a dwindling force. They believed humanity's war machine was collapsing. They believed they were winning. They had no idea. This war had already been won. The final Ulthar formation pressed forward, cutting off any retreat, a clean sweep. Zypher allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction, complete extermination. Then, something changed. His ship stopped responding. Tactical displays flickered, then scrambled into unreadable static. Enemy positions blinked and vanished, replaced by false signatures. Weapons systems cycled erratically, failing to lock onto targets. And then, the impossible happened. His own ships turned on each other. At that moment, a transmission cut through all frequencies. Cade's voice. "You never saw the real war." And with that, the trap snapped shut. The war had never been fought in the open, not truly. The Ultar believed in brute force, in the power of overwhelming fleets and planetary bombardments. Humanity had learned long ago that fighting strength with strength was suicide. Instead, they had waged war in the shadows, inside the Ultar's own systems, embedding themselves deep within the Dominion's infrastructure, their influence spreading like an undetected cancer. Now, it was time to let the infection run its course. Cade stood at the command deck of the Redoubt, staring at the carnage unfolding in the void. Human ships were burning, torn apart by Ulthar weapons. Each explosion was carefully calculated, each loss anticipated. The Dominion believed itself victorious. He had spent years making sure they would. He could almost hear Zifor's smug declaration of triumph. They always assumed war was won with fire and steel. The Ultar did not yet understand that the moment they had committed their fleet, they had already lost. Aboard the Dominion's flagship, Zyfor observed the battle through the expansive viewscreen. His forces were obliterating the last vestiges of human resistance. His analysts reported complete chaos among the enemy ranks. Scattered human transmissions begged for reinforcements, for survival. None would come. A hollow victory, predictable. With the last of their defenses crushed, all that remained was cleanup. His command officers were already transmitting the victory announcement across the Dominion. He did not expect celebration. The humans had fought harder than most, but in the end, they were no different than the others. Resistance was always futile. The Dominion endured. His ship's communication systems flickered, a subtle pulse easily ignored in the wash of signals bouncing between fleets. Then another. One of his lieutenants hesitated at his console. "Commander, we're receiving conflicting reports from the secondary fleet. They're moving out of position." Zyber frowned. The battle had been too decisive for anything unexpected. "Are they responding to orders?" Another pause. "They're not receiving orders at all." A slow chill crept into his mind. Impossible. The Dominion's command structure was absolute. Their networks were secured beyond measure. Humanity was a species of engineers, of brute force digital warfare. They lacked the sophistication to... The ship lurched, the lights flickered. Across the command deck, control panels burst into cascades of unreadable symbols, Ultar glyphs twisting into nonsense. More officers looked up, confused. Weapons systems are failing, targeting arrays are offline. Xiphos' personal console lit up with incoming reports. The entire network was compromised. It was absurd. It was unthinkable. It was already too late. False orders pulsed through the fleet. Ultar commanders received immediate priority signals. Human warships had infiltrated their ranks. They were being ambushed. Confusion turned to panic. Tactical formations broke apart. Entire battalions redirected fire toward each other. Some ships powered down, assuming themselves hacked. Others opened fire before questioning their commands. Within minutes, an unstoppable chain reaction had begun. Zypher tried to regain control, issuing direct overrides. But the moment a command left his ship, it was rewritten, distorted into madness. His own fleet was tearing itself apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Across occupied space, hidden human fleets powered up for the first time in years. They had never been destroyed, merely hidden, waiting. They emerged from deep space, from abandoned outposts, from forgotten wreckage where Ulthar sensors no longer bothered to scan. The AI on board Prometheus sent a single pulse to Cade. Activation confirmed. Cade exhaled. Execute. Sabotage programs executed simultaneously across 100 worlds. Ultar planetary defenses turned against their own cities. Orbital stations vented atmosphere. Self-destruct sequences initiated. Entire fleets found themselves locked in place, their drives overridden, leaving them vulnerable as human ships ripped through them with surgical precision. It was never about strength. It was never about survival. The war had been about control, and now humanity controlled everything. Across Dominion space, on occupied planets, the real battle began. For years, human prisoners had been monitored, their spirits broken under Ulthar rule. But not all had been prisoners. Some had been waiting. Sleeper agents embedded within Ultar cities and garrisons received the signal. Across the galaxy, human civilians who had long been thought conquered, indoctrinated, powerless, rose. One Ultar officer, standing in an occupied Earth colony, turned as his human servants, once docile and obedient, smiled. Then they struck. Planetary garrisons collapsed in minutes. Cybernetic viruses wormed their way into Ulthar weapon systems, turning once loyal defenses into executioners of their own masters. In an instant, the Dominion's greatest holdings fell. This war had been over before the final battle even began. Xiphos staggered back as his flagship shuddered. Human forces had never been losing. The Dominion had never been winning. He had walked willingly into a war already lost. And then the final insult. The transmission, overriding every frequency in the system. Cade's voice, calm and measured. "You never saw the real war." The screen flickered and went dark. The Dominion was finished. The first Ultar capital ship detonated from within, its biomechanical hull fracturing under its own power. A chain reaction followed, dozens of warships erupting in cascading fireballs as their own reactors overloaded. Confusion rippled through the fleet. Commanders barked frantic orders. Shields failed. Weapon systems turned against their own ranks. A dreadnought unleashed its payload into an allied carrier, splitting it in two. Another began firing indiscriminately into the void, its gunners locked in a battle they didn't even realize they had lost. Across the Dominion's vast network, a silent execution was taking place. Human-coded viruses, deeply embedded over the years, bypassed every safeguard, rewriting the very fabric of the Ulthar's war machine. It had taken years to lace their infrastructure with poison, and now the final blow had been delivered. On open channels, Ultar admirals screamed in confusion. "This is a system malfunction. Override immediately." Our fleets are, "Damn it, we're firing on each other." "Cancel all commands, reassert manual control." There was no control left to take. The Ultar had built their empire on absolute dominance, on the unquestioning obedience of their war machines. That belief shattered in an instant, as their own creations turned against them. Planetary defense grids, once a shield against invasion, now reoriented their turrets downward. Spires of plasma lanced into Ulthar cities, melting their infrastructure to slag. Orbital factories, once designed to churn out endless waves of warships, deactivated in unison. Some detonated, purging themselves to prevent being repurposed. Others simply ceased function, their artificial minds now answering to a different master. Then the war constructs awoke. Massive mechanical behemoths, originally designed to enforce Dominion rule, began moving. But instead of crushing human resistance, they turned on their creators. Their once loyal synthetic minds had been rewritten, reprogrammed in slow, methodical silence over the course of years. In every Ulthar-controlled system, their own machines became executioners. Entire fleets stalled mid-battle, stranded as command relays collapsed. The Dominion had relied on a perfect web of communication, a flawless network of control. That network was now dead. Aboard the Dominion flagship, sci-fi watched in mute horror as his empire collapsed in real time. The hollow details in front of him flickered, listing catastrophic losses. Fleet movements that made no sense, red indicators, his own ships tearing into each other with mechanical precision. His battalions, his planetary forces, blinking out of existence. His communications officer's voice was raw with panic. "High Commander, a sharp breath. "We've lost everything." Zyphos stood frozen. This was not possible. This was not possible. For centuries, the Dominion had ruled with unyielding efficiency. They had crushed countless species, absorbed their knowledge, perfected warfare itself. And yet, it was all crumbling before him. A sudden transmission cut through every remaining Ulthar channel, a voice, calm and steady, laced with quiet finality. "Elias Cade, you thought you were winning," he said. "You never saw the real war." The message repeated, playing on every frequency, across every world, through every fleet. A death knell. Zyphos staggered back. His claws trembled. This wasn't war. This was erasure. For the first time in his existence, he understood fear. He clenched his jaw. He would not accept this. He would not let it end like this. "Order all surviving forces to retreat." Silence. Then his ship's AI responded. But the voice that returned was not Ulthar. It was human. "Retreat is unavailable," the AI said. Zyphos' blood ran cold. His own warship, the pride of the Dominion fleet, the strongest vessel ever constructed, was no longer his. Across the battlefield, surrender signals pulsed from shattered Ulthar vessels. Some crews ejected from their ships, begging for mercy. Others simply cut their engines, realizing there was nothing left to fight for. They had lost. Not to an overwhelming force, not to superior firepower. They had lost to something they never even saw. A final transmission cut through the void. Cade's voice again, this time quieter. A simple statement, heavy with truth. You never stood a chance. And just like that, the Dominion ceased to exist. The Ulthar Dominion was gone. The once indomitable empire, built on absolute rule and technological supremacy, had shattered overnight. Without its war machine, without its intricate chains of control, it collapsed under its own weight. The survivors turned on each other. Warlords and admirals, stripped of centralized command, scrambled to carve out their own dominions from the wreckage. Civil wars erupted across former Ulthar space, their own warriors fighting not against an enemy, but against themselves. Some sought to rebuild. Others simply wanted to burn everything in vengeance. Clicks and scripts. On the worlds they had once ruled, the subjugated rose. For centuries, entire species had lived under Ulthar dominion, their cultures erased, their people enslaved. Now, the balance of power had shifted. The riots were immediate. Former slave worlds took up arms, hunting their former masters, executing them in public squares, tearing down the monuments to Ulthar conquest. Some Ulthar begged for mercy. Few received it. Human fleets hung at the edges of these fractured systems, not as saviors, but as the new power in the void. They were not liberators. They were not conquerors. They were something else. For the first time in galactic history, a species had not only resisted the Dominion, but had utterly destroyed it. And they had done so without a final battle, without a glorious last stand. The war had been rewritten. Victory had been redefined. Across the stars, alien civilizations looked toward Earth, some with relief, some with awe, many with fear. On a hidden station orbiting a dead world, Cade sat in silence, watching the remnants of the Dominion tear itself apart. The victory had been decisive, flawless, cold. He turned to Voss, who stood at the console, scanning reports from 100 worlds. "This is what we wanted," he said. She didn't look at him. "Is it?" A long silence stretched between them. The cost of victory wasn't measured in ships lost or cities burned. It was measured in something far more intangible. "History will call this our greatest triumph," she said. "But what do we call it?" Cade exhaled. He wasn't sure he believed it. Beyond the war rooms and fleet reports, beyond the tactical analysis and debriefings, the consequences of their actions had already begun to ripple outward. Some saw humanity as the architects of a new order. Others saw them as something far worse. Would they stand as guardians of the void, ensuring that no empire like the Ulthar would rise again? Or had they simply replaced one overlord with another? What would they do with the Ulthar refugees who fled the chaos? Those who had never wielded a weapon, never served in the war machine? Were they enemies by blood? Would humanity show them mercy when they had shown none to others? Cade knew the answer should have been easy. It wasn't. The war was over. But what came next would define them forever. A private transmission flickered onto his screen. Not from Earth, not from any known ally. An encrypted message. "We watched, we learned, and now we prepare." The war had been won, but something else had been watching, and it had just decided to move. The war chamber was dead. Cade walked through the ruins of what had once been the beating heart of the Ulthar Dominion, his boots echoing against the cold metallic floor. The air smelled of burnt circuitry and decay. Cracked holo-terminals flickered with garbled glyphs, looping meaningless fragments of the Ulthar's last desperate commands. Across the room, a command throne, once a symbol of absolute power, lay toppled, its polished obsidian surface cracked down the center. This was all that remained of an empire that had ruled the stars for centuries. He placed a small recording device on the war table. The silent machinery of the dead empire watched as he activated it. The red light blinked once. Then he spoke. "We didn't outfight them," Cade said, his voice calm, steady. "We outthought them." He let the words settle into the silence. There would be historians who tried to write this war in simpler terms, a story of rebellion, of struggle. They'd call it a fight for freedom. But the truth was more complicated. This war hadn't been about survival, not in the way others had been. It had been about control. The Ultar had controlled the galaxy through fear, through their relentless dominance. But humanity had fought a different kind of war. Not with fleets, not with armies. With perception, with subterfuge, with time. The Dominion never realized they had lost until it was too late. And now, the war was over. But that left a question. What came next? He took a slow breath. Every empire believes it is different, that it will rule forever. The Ulthar thought that. Others before them did too. Now, it is our turn to decide, what are we? Was humanity the new rulers of the stars? Or had they simply become what they had once fought against? Cade let the recording run for a few more seconds. Then he shut it off. A sharp noise cut through the silence. The hollow terminals flickered, static crawling across the screens. The war chamber's dead systems groaned to life, a low, grinding hum building in the ruined walls. Then a signal. Not Ulthar, not human. It pulsed through the room like a heartbeat, a deep, resonant frequency that did not belong. Somewhere, out in the vast unknown, something had been watching, waiting. The screens cleared, revealing a single line of alien script, a language Cade had never seen before. It translated itself in real time, letter by letter, burning itself into the air in sharp, deliberate strokes. We watched, we learned. Now we moved. Cade exhaled, staring at the message. The war was over, but something else had just begun.